Hello and welcome to Data Conversations over Coffee with myself, Craig Stewart. It's been quite a few months since I've actually done one of these interviews. I've missed them so much. I love having conversations with people around data analytics. So I'm back in the Linden studio, beautiful setup. And with me, I've got Nozipho Duma, who's the head of data at FNB. Nozi, thanks for joining me. Thanks for being the first guest in a while. I think things have just got a little bit out of control at work and with life and COVID and everything, but now it's time we settle back. We have great conversations. How are you doing?
I'm good. Thank you, Craig. I'm so excited to actually join you today. So thank you for having me.
Yeah.
I'm quite honored to have a lively discussion with you today. So yeah, and even just meet face to face and enjoy a coffee whilst we're at it.
So rare these days to have that sort of face-to-face interaction. But I think they're coming back. I think we're going to be careful. I think the vaccination rate is going quite well. And people seem to be relaxed a bit more, but I think not to get too complacent with the whole COVID situation.
No, definitely.
So I thought maybe before we kick off into our topic, so we're really going to be talking about data strategy today and how that aligns with corporate strategy, because I think those are two areas where I've seen a lot of companies not necessarily get things wrong, but maybe kind of not understand how they kind of align those two things. But before we get into that, why don't you give yourself a bit of an introduction, just so people know what it is that you're working on, background, etc., and then we'll dig into the meat of the conversation.
Yeah, sure. So I've always been passionate about IT since I was a little girl. I've just been passionate to see how IT actually transforms society. So I studied IT at UCT. I did business science and information systems, so with the business lens. And then I started working in consulting, worked a bit in banking. I've actually now come back in banking the past 3 years, and also in a global petrochemicals company, and working predominantly on digital transformational journeys, which I'm quite passionate about. So a lot of that is integrating, systems and also taking people onto that journey and rolling that out into the organization in iterative processes. So that's been quite the theme of the work that I've done, and I've also done it not just in South Africa but in other parts of the world. And now I'm focusing a lot on the data perspective, so data-driven initiatives and seeing those through, architecting the solutions and being part of putting together designs and the implementations thereof. I'm also an avid runner, so I love running, I love hiking, so I travel a lot to different parts of the world, even in South Africa. We've got so many gems here, just to also take the time in to breathe, reflect. So I quite enjoy that. And of course, I love coffee, so after a run or a cycle, it's always nice to have a lovely coffee. And I think also the other component about me is I'm very passionate about people, so the people development and just transforming them as well and taking them through the journey is very close to my heart. That's a little bit about me.
What a huge amount we actually have in common. Avid runners, love coffee in the data world. I've really missed the running and the races. And
I know, right? They give you just that gees and that little jump to get ready.
Something to actually really motivate yourself to train, but I'm hoping to get back into that.
I hope so too.
Soon, but I haven't given up the coffee at all. All right, perfect. So we're talking today about data strategy and how that aligns to corporate strategy and everything that goes around that. But I think before we get in, let's maybe get some definitions out there. What is a data strategy, and why does a company need to have one? And it seems like quite a rudimentary question, I guess, given our audience, but there's so many companies and people that I speak to that still aren't even there yet. Or they think they've got a data strategy, but it's not really something that's driving the organization. So why don't you give us your thoughts on that?
I think, every organization and business today needs a data strategy, and that data strategy has to tie back to your business strategy. So your business objectives, your goals, your priorities. So you kind of have to look at it from an eye of what data do we have in this organization? What data do we need to acquire to actually drive and realize business value? And that business value could be strategic, it could be operational. So, how do we better meet some of our customer needs and properly solve for them through data-driven initiatives? How do we even improve our own organizational operations through some of the data initiatives that we have? And then also, how do we better also provide product centric or customer centric solutions to our customers that are data driven? And I think also a part of a data strategy is also looking at the capabilities that it requires to actually be robust and be able to be enabled. So those capabilities are what are some of the technologies that we need to support that data strategy, and also what are the people aspects, the skill sets, the growing of those teams or areas to actually implement on the data strategy. And then another component of it is then once you've kind of linked the data strategy to the business strategy and the objectives and the priorities, it's then looking at the data initiatives that you actually want to roll out to realize those strategic and operational elements for your business. And that then also drives, which data assets do we create? Which insights do we create? And how do we disseminate those into the various other systems and the actual end users? And then just working together to put a plan to actually, to make that happen and also close up any of the gaps that might be seen.
Yeah.
So those are some of the elements that I see are quite critical in putting together data, or rather covering the components of a data strategy.
I know a lot of people that watch this podcast and come to our events, they're still very early in their journeys, or they work for smaller companies that maybe don't have a data strategy yet, or they're just sort of appointed a head of data. What is that process of actually developing the data strategy? You talk about finding what are the data assets that you need, where do you get it from, who's involved. How do you go about and actually map that out? Because that's quite a big task.
Yeah.
I mean, I sort of assume that that's the really heavy lifting stage of the whole process. Let's just get everything together, then you can fine tune it and roll it out. But how do you even start that process? Some people might be sitting here going, wow, that is just the biggest job. Where do I start?
Yeah. Yeah, I think you also have to follow these steps to start it quite, step by step. So I would say we spoke about the vision. So what is our vision or problems and opportunities that we want to solve for through our data, and how do we see that playing out and being implemented in our business? And what is the business strategy that supports that vision for the data that we want to have? So if I'm wanting to improve product offerings, what data sets or information that I can use to realize that? So that would be one thing. And how can I then link that back to the actual strategy? So that vision is quite important. Then the next component is taking that vision and breaking it down to actually measurable and understandable objectives. So those objectives then could be, okay, we want to target product offering for these type of customers, and we want to start being a bit more focused on the customer centricity. And that means we need to collect additional sources from external parties to get a little bit of understanding of who Craig is and his world and his family setup and his love for running and coffee and almost like talk to him as who he is, instead of almost a cookie cutter solution. So those objectives also need to be quite sizable, chunkable, but also our users and people in the business must be able to understand what they are. And I think that then the next part is looking at, how do we go about to actually collaborate and put this together? Who do we need in the business to actually execute on this together? So that's also bringing together the resources, the people, and the agile team sometimes. And this is made up of various people in the business. It could be your product specialist, your IT guys, your business process guys, your data guys, your information specialist. So working with them to also realize that. Then the other component is looking at what's our current landscape? What does that look like? So what are some of the gaps? And that's looking at, if you look at governance, compliance, the way that we actually implement solutions, how we coordinate and orchestrate people. When we're working on work items to implement them, how do we go about doing that and just assessing that? And then from that, then comes the actual, looking at, okay, cool, now we've done an assessment of the current landscape and we've also identified the gaps. How do we now actually start closing those gaps by putting detailed roadmap and plans to say, okay, for our data maturity to actually improve, these are the things we need to focus on. Okay, we need to focus a little bit on risk, especially now with Papaya, and some of the initiatives that we need to do there. Okay, I mean, you look at COVID, some of the COVID and the riots reliefs that some of the financial institutions have put in place. Those could be some things that you solve for because of the current situations that are happening. So you kind of look at those gaps and then start to put proper timelines in place. And then I guess the other component is just making sure that there is some buy-in from a leadership and executive level. Yeah. Because you can't do, it will be very difficult to execute on all those components by yourself as a data office or as an IT shop or as a BU, but it actually has to be completely understood at a group and leadership level, and that buy-in is quite critical.
Because the data there is kind of really enabling the corporate performance and strategy. It's not kind of the main driver behind it. All those things that you talk about product and customer and risk, it's all things that require data to be done properly. So therefore, that whole thing really does need to be pushed from the top down or be integrated. Say, look, we are a data-driven company.
Yes.
And that's really what the leadership needs to talk about.
And this is what it looks like for us. It means us maturing our data. It means us thinking differently to how we used to problem solve before. Now we're problem solving with a data lens of what current data do we have, what do we need, what are we trying to solve for from a business strategy perspective, and what are some of those initiatives that we can put in place. Look, and I also think the data strategy kind of has to be simple. A lot of, I find in different parts, and when you tackle it, because it sounds and it seems sometimes so complicated, it can be lengthy and pages and pages.
And you lose people.
And you lose people, Craig. So you have to make it simple, understandable, measurable, and actionable so that people that, in the organization and even the teams that you now work with to execute on these can absorb that information.
I love that. I think people need to be confident to make the strategy simple. And I think maybe they overcomplicate it to make themselves seem indispensable to the organization, that we've come up with this very detailed, complex strategy. But then you actually lose people when you're trying to land it in the organization because they don't understand it. They don't kind of see the benefit that they get. So kind of your key message there is keep it simple, but obviously make it really effective.
Yeah.
Okay, perfect. All right, so one of the areas I know that you're quite passionate about is the data architecture side. We were talking about it just before we got into the episode. Why don't you tell everybody sort of your thoughts around why the data architecture is so important to the data strategy? Because you look at this data strategy, it's a big, leather-bound thing, this is what we do. But then to actually go and put it into action requires quite a bit of change from a technological and an architectural point of view within the organization.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, I'm passionate about that so much because that's the execution layer. So, I mean, the data architecture helps and is a big enabler to a data strategy. So it asks questions like, okay, so when we collect this data, how do we collect it? Where do we store it? And then once we get it into a central place, how do we then build structured and data products? And then how do we take these and disseminate them into other systems and to users to be able to actually consume those data assets that we've built and done? So if you really look at just the landscape of a data architecture, of course, on the far left, maybe you've got the data producers. And it's quite important to know who your data producers are and knowing also what source systems data where that source system data resides, and the contractual. So I mean, in our current business, we source data externally,
Yeah.
and lots of SLAs and information
Yeah.
to get those through a pipeline onto our platform. So that's one component that's quite important in the data architecture, just understanding how we get the data onto platform. Then on the far end, you've got the data consumption component, and then of course there's the middle part, which is really this
Yeah.
data pipeline, which really talks
Yeah.
to the architecture, right? And this pipeline then says, okay, cool. So we've taken the data from the data producers, we've found ways, and we've implemented ways to get data onto platform, whether that's real-time batch or whatever format. And then once it's there, how do I then actually build a product or insights? And then how do I then plug that to other systems, whether it's channels that our customers are using, whether it's our BI teams that are building cool dashboards, reports, whether it's our ML and AI team that are spinning off the data that's currently sitting there and writing these
Yeah.
cool algorithms. So that data pipeline is quite key. And I think for me, the robustness of that is quite important. How quickly we can do it, how scalable it is. It talks to then these data initiatives that we spoke about earlier and implementing them, because you can put things down in a roadmap. But do we have a data architecture that's in place that helps us robustly implement quick MVPs,
Yeah.
iterative work, and actually start showing value? Because that's the other thing about a data strategy, is that the organization has to see the value and see that, okay, we are realizing some benefit. This is the benefit that we realize, and we can quantify it. Okay, we are actually getting data into one place, and we can search it, and we can understand it, and we can play around with it and make it actionable. Very, very key in a data architecture. And I think the other thing that a data architecture enables is, because we work in different silos sometimes, right? Because we're solving for our own BUs or our own segments and our own customer types. It's kind of nice because it brings everything together so that we start looking at customers, even employees and suppliers, at a customer-centric view, a single view, because now all these silos that actually solve for similar things can come together and solve for it holistically. And guess what? You can, because some of that data is sitting there readily for you to tap into those insights and build really cool work that you then can utilize.
You talked there about people getting excited about the value that they can see from data and they can get involved. What sort of journey have you taken to get people to that point? Because it doesn't just happen. They don't go, oh, apparently there's data being used and there's a great architecture and therefore we can use it. How have you kind of really told the story of the work that you're doing from a data architecture point of view, from a product point of view, so that the rest of the business actually gets excited about it and wants to get involved, wants to give you their data, wants to use the insights? Because that kind of seems to be the sticking point for the most part. Like what sort of tips and advice have you got for people that are maybe struggling with that?
I think, when you land something home and you tell it through a story. So, for example, if you've implemented a use case, and the use case says, we've now built a model or an insight predictive model that tells us the propensity for Craig to actually default on his payments. And we've utilized not just internal data, we've also utilized other external data that we didn't have before. And we've acquired that data. And the insights that we've built was used on existing data and existing processes. So by that, what transactional data as well as any other behavioral data that we might have of you, and additional external data. And we've been able to actually almost, take that insight and in an application process, be able to decide and make a decision, say, actually, it doesn't make sense for you to get approval on this type of product because your propensity to default on it is higher because we've seen A, B, C, and D.
Which is all
and we've used this
hypothetical, by the way.
Yes. So it's telling the story, but also as you tell the story, you bring in the architecture. So how did we do that? Okay, that was a real-time use case. Okay, we acquired certain data. We had to build pipelines to get that external data. After that, we built insights using existing data sources as well as these external ones to make this data product. Then we said, okay, as part of application processing or any other analytical modeling, whether it's reactive, proactive, we make a decision based on that actual asset that you've created. So you have to kind of like go through it with the users, but linking it to the supporting enablement.
The value they can get from it.
Yes. And landing that conversation that it doesn't happen by osmosis or, once the data is there, then everything's fine. No, it's still stringing along the different components that are necessary.
Valuable. And I suppose, it's a conversation for another day because we could probably spend an hour on it, but the data privacy and protection conversation comes into play there, where you're getting in external data on customers, etc. I'm not going to press you on that now because honestly we could speak about that for a long time, but we'll definitely have you on the show later on in the season.
Yeah,
okay.
We've done lots of work on that now with Papaya.
Huge at the moment. All right, just finally, I know digital transformation is also an area that you focused on. You mentioned it at the top of the episode. What role does data play in digital transformation? Because this is something, digital transformation, people have been talking about for a long time. It's maybe been kicked up a gear because of COVID and working from home and various things like that. But from a data perspective, what role does it play in the digital transformation of an organization? Because it's not just a thing. You don't just digitally transform.
Yeah.
There's so many elements. Culture is massive to it. But what role does data play?
Yeah, I think, and it's interesting because I in my journey, I've kind of transitioned from digital transformation lead work to data work. I think both of them are joined at the hip. Digital transformation obviously speaks usually about taking existing systems and improving those, integrating with new ones at one single place or one platform, and then solving for the objectives or the business drivers, now using this technology that is more, well, not even just the technology, but the integration that you have of these technologies and systems to deliver more to our customers and even our organization. And I think data with digital transformation plays a pivotal role because when you're transforming a business, part of transforming it is, of course, how are you going to transform it? It's not just technology. What data are you going to use to transform the business as well, and the end customer views there? So it's hand in hand. So if I, for example, look at in our current business, platform driven, sure. Now also very much data driven on platform. So the digitization, of course, is that platform thinking and journey and ecosystem, but the data driving of that is almost married together. So cool. So now we've acquired and we've implemented robust systems and processes that work together to solve for particular things. And then, okay, how else then can we almost accelerate that digital transformation using the data sets that we have and the assets? So yeah, I think it's not separate. To me, it's joined at the hip, and it's the two marrying together to solve for that.
It's an essential ingredient in the digital transformation.
Yeah, definitely.
All right, Nozi, thank you so much for joining us. Before I let you go, you did mention it a while ago with the running, but what's your relationship like with coffee?
My relationship with coffee. So I used to have almost 4 to 5 cups of coffee a day. I've narrowed that down now to 2. The past 2 years, it's been a struggle, but I love my coffee, especially having coffee one-on-one with friends, like I said earlier, after a nice run or hike. Yeah, no, I enjoyed the coffee. I had mine earlier, so
Good.
so yeah, no, lover of
Yeah.
coffee and conversations.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that coffee during the run, I often on a long run will have an espresso or something
Yeah.
just to keep me going. So that's my relationship with coffee is quite essential sometimes as well. Nozi, thank you so much for joining us. Thank you for being in studio as well. It's always great to have these conversations in person.
Thank you so much for having me, Craig.
Yeah.
I really enjoyed it, and I hope the guys listening in and watching also enjoyed it.
No, absolutely. It was great.